When Big Shaq catches the school's golden kids mocking a disabled boy, he doesn't shout, he listens. What starts as laughter behind a screen becomes the spark for a reckoning no one saw coming. The rich kids had power, but Shaq had the truth, and the whole school's about to hear it. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The air was thick with the kind of sunshine that seemed almost staged. Roosevelt High looked like it had been plucked straight out of a glossy school brochure. All brick elegance and symmetrical windows, trimmed hedges framing walkways. The flag gently waving under the kind of sky that made everything look honest. The kind of place that made people say, "What a nice school." Shaquille O'Neal, better known to the students as Coach Shaq, or simply Big Shaq, stepped out of his truck with the ease of a man who didn't need to prove anything. He wasn't wearing a suit, or anything flashy. Just a plain gray Roosevelt High hoodie, and loose-fit jeans. Even in stillness he carried gravity, not just because of his towering height, or the way every space seemed to shrink around him, but because of the energy he brought with him. People looked when he moved, but he never asked for attention. He wasn't new to the school. Not really. He'd been volunteering off and on for about 8 months, helping out with mentorship programs, checking in on troubled kids, donating supplies without fanfare. He never made speeches, never posted about it online. That wasn't his way. He just showed up every time, and that's what people noticed most. The fact that he was always there. Today though, something felt different. The football field buzzed with student life. Kids were pouring out of classrooms for an early fall pep rally. The marching band tuned their brass in jittery bursts. Cheerleaders ran drills with ponytails bobbing, and clusters of students laughed in their little pods like constellations locked in orbit. Shaq moved slowly through it all, scanning the crowd like he always did. Not for praise, not even for connection, but for something else. He had a habit of watching the edges. Because the edges are where real stories live. And that's when he saw him. Off to the far right corner of the bleachers, just beside the maintenance gate, sat a boy in a motorized wheelchair. Alone, thin, pale, small-framed. His hoodie was too big, sleeves gathered around trembling wrists. A pair of noise-canceling headphones hung loosely around his neck, wires tucked into a beat-up backpack that looked like it had weathered too much for someone his age. One hand was fiddling nervously with the wheel joystick. The other gripped the strap of the bag like it was a shield. His name was Noah, and Shaq had seen him before, briefly once by the cafeteria doors, once in the front row of the gym during an anti-bullying assembly. Both times Noah wasn't just alone, he was invisible. Shaq didn't move toward him, not yet. He learned long ago that some kids don't need a hero crashing in. Sometimes they just need someone to see them. So he nodded once in Noah's direction, subtle, respectful, and kept walking the perimeter of the field. As he passed near the cheer team, he overheard names being thrown around in that fast, sugar-sharp teenage tone that always sounded like a joke laced with barbed wire. Braden, Savannah, Knox, Land, they were the kids everyone knew, the ones whose photos were always in the newsletters, who threw parties in lake houses their parents didn't even check on, who smiled a little too wide when teachers were near, and smirked when they weren't. Polished kid, well-groomed, well-dressed, well-connected, and behind those grins, well-practiced cruelty. Not the loud, messy kind, the covert, surgical kind, the kind that always stayed 2 inches inside the line of consequence. Shaq didn't judge quickly, but he noticed patterns, body language, glances, posture, and there, just behind the bleachers, he saw a flash of something that kicked at his gut. Knox and Landon were huddled, whispering into each other's ears, and stifling laughter. One of them held up a phone, not high, not for a selfie, but low and tilted toward the wheelchair corner. Shaq didn't need to hear it to know the kind of jokes being made. He'd seen those laughs before. Same format, different year, same rot. He adjusted his hoodie and walked the long way around the field. No confrontation. Not yet. Confrontation without context just makes people defensive. What Shaq needed was a wider picture. The principal, Ms. Elridge, waved him down as he approached the staff table near the 50-yard line. She was polite, competent, and friendly, the kind of administrator that kept a school running with smiles and policies. She greeted Shaq with a practiced warmth, talking about how glad they were to have him helping with the mentorship program, how the school was lucky to have a figure like him investing his time. He smiled back, But half his attention stayed locked on Noah, still sitting alone, still untouched by the laughter rolling across the field. The rally kicked off with the band bursting into a fight song. Flags waved, students clapped, and the illusion of unity blanketed the bleachers. But underneath, Shaq could feel the divide. The separation wasn't always racial, though it was there quietly embedded. It was structural, emotional, silent. It was the kids who came from money, from power, who walked like the hallways owed them space, and the ones like Noah, small, overlooked, fragile, who had to fight just to stay visible. The cheer squad did their routine. The football captains gave quick shout-outs, and then the mic was passed to the vice principal, who reminded everyone about Spirit Week dress code and encouraged positive attitudes. As students cheered, Shaq watched a teacher, a young one, maybe second year, glance toward Noah and then just look away. It wasn't malice. It was fatigue, the kind that comes from seeing something too many times and never knowing how to fix it. By the time the event wrapped and students started drifting back toward class, Shaq circled once more toward the bleachers. Noah was still there, still untouched. As Shaq passed nearby, he paused. Just a second. Just long enough for Noah to notice him. "Good set of wheels," Shaq said gently, motioning to the chair. Noah looked up, eyes wide behind thick lenses. He nodded once, barely. Shaq didn't linger. He gave a slight tap to his chest and kept moving. Noah looked down, and then slowly smiled. Back in the main hallway, the Golden Group, as students had nicknamed the rich kids, walked in a tight, laughing pack. They moved like royalty, cracking jokes, tossing side glances at passing students, their backs straight, their laughs controlled but cutting. Savannah's phone buzzed. A new meme. Something she showed the group with a mischievous grin. Shaq watched from near the trophy case. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. What was coming, what he was going to build, wasn't going to start with confrontation. It was going to start with truth. And truth, Shaq had learned, doesn't always knock on the door. Sometimes it waits in the grass, like a storm you never see coming. The next day the sun returned, unapologetic and blazing, drenching the courtyard in a golden warmth that made everything seem softer than it really was. Roosevelt High moved like a machine, bell to bell, bodies flowing in practiced currents from one class to another. The hallways echoed with sneakers squeaking on waxed tile, locker doors slamming with casual rhythm, and the murmured energy of a Friday with nothing but weekend ahead. It all seemed ordinary. But Shaq had learned that cruelty rarely announced itself. It didn't slam doors or shout across parking lots. It slithered. It disguised itself in smiles, in chuckles shared between friends, in quick glances exchanged at the right moment. And today, it came in broad daylight. The school was holding a last-minute pep rally in the gym, a polished event meant to celebrate a cross-town rivalry and drum up school pride before the evening game. The bleachers were packed with students in red and gold, waving foam fingers and snapping selfies beneath banners that read "Roosevelt Rises." The band played snappy, over-rehearsed fight songs, and the principal stood near the podium with a hand on the mic, waiting for the perfect lull to launch her announcements. Shaq stood near the back entrance by the folded bleachers. It gave him a wide view of the entire gym. His height made it easy to see everything. But it was his stillness that made him invisible. While others clapped and cheered, he watched. Not the stage, but the students. Not their cheers, but their body language. It wasn't suspicion. It was instinct. At first he didn't notice Noah. The boy had wheeled himself toward the lower east corner of the gym, the far side, shadowed by the fold of the bleachers. He moved carefully, avoiding contact, flinching slightly, every time a cheer spiked too loud. His headphones were back around his neck, not covering his ears. He looked smaller today, like the noise was pressing down on him. Shaq's eyes trailed him for just a second, and then something else snapped his attention. Laughter. Not the kind that rose from a joke or surprise. This was sharper, controlled, targeted. 4 students leaned against the side wall near the snack machines. Braden, Knox, Savannah, and Landon. They looked like a fashion spread had come to life. Braden, all gelled blonde hair, designer sneakers, and a monogrammed varsity jacket, held his phone angled downward, camera lens trained at Noah, zoomed in without his consent. The others leaned in, smirking, whispering, laughing in short stifled bursts. Braden's thumb tapped the screen. A photo, maybe a video. Shaq's jaw set, but he didn't move. Not yet. Knox nudged Savannah, who leaned over to see the screen. Her reaction said it all. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes widening with gleeful disgust. The kind that says, "Can you believe this?" Her voice was too low to catch, but her body said everything. Shaq felt his gut twist. He scanned the gym. No one else noticed. Teachers were too focused on stage cues. Students were locked into their own circles. The laughter was hidden in plain sight. And then it clicked. The entire moment was choreographed. These weren't teenagers making a thoughtless joke. This was something more polished, more dangerous. This was cruelty turned into currency, traded, shared, turned into content. A social performance with an unknowing, unwilling victim. Noah turned slightly, sensing eyes on him. His movement stuttered. His hand froze on the joystick. He didn't look back, but his shoulders tensed. He knew. He always knew. Shaq watched Braden's thumb move again. Swipe, type, grin, airdropping something. Landon chuckled low, glanced toward the bleachers, then back at the screen. They were laughing again. It was quick, soft, like a joke passed under the table in church, all under the radar. That was when Shaq recognized Braden for who he really was. Not just another smug teenager. This was the mayor's son. Shaq had seen him once before, a photo in the local paper shaking hands with city officials at some community luncheon about youth leadership. A young face in a room full of old politics. Polished. Protected. Now here he was, mocking a disabled kid behind a screen, with the same smile he wore in the newspaper. Shaq's hands balled slightly at his sides. Not from rage. From memory. He'd seen this pattern too many times. Polished kids from polished families, doing the kind of damage no detention slip could touch. Braden wasn't just a teenager acting out. He was a symbol of how far entitlement could stretch when nobody pulled the reins. Still, Shaq didn't move. He watched as Braden shoved his phone back in his jacket and walked toward the bleachers. The group followed. They didn't even glance at Noah as they passed. That was the trick. Make him feel it without being seen doing it. Ghost bullying. Invisible fire. Shaq stepped forward. Just once. His boots hit the gym floor with a thud. Students nearby looked up, sensing a shift in air pressure. But he didn't go to Braden. He didn't call him out. He walked the long route, circling behind the bleachers toward the gym exit. On his way, he passed near Noah. The boy didn't look up. His hand was trembling on the chair controls. Shaq paused. "You all right, young blood?" he asked softly. Noah nodded without lifting his head. Shaq didn't push. He just stood beside him for a moment. A silent tower. Then he moved on. Back in the parking lot, Shaq leaned against his truck, hands in his pockets. The roar of the rally buzzed faintly through the gym walls, muffled by concrete. He looked out across the campus, the buildings, the fields, the perfectly trimmed hedges, all of it so clean, so structured. But under the polish, cracks. He remembered something his mother used to say. Sometimes what glitters most is just trying to hide what's rotting underneath. He pulled out his phone, not to call the principal, not to report anything. He opened his notes app and began typing. Not a complaint. A plan. Because Shaq wasn't here to scold kids. He was here to flip the system on itself. And that started with knowing what kind of storm he was walking into, and exactly how to make it rain. Shaq arrived early, his boots quiet on the asphalt as he made his way toward the main building. He wasn't scheduled for anything that morning, but something inside him had decided otherwise. He wasn't looking for confrontation. He was looking for truth, and truth, as he knew, didn't sit in offices. It lived in the corners people avoided. He started with the front office, politely asking the receptionist about student mentorship logs. Just routine, he said. She didn't question him. Who would? He was Big Shaq. But instead of focusing on the honor roll names, he scanned for a specific one, Noah C. Delaney. He found it on page 3. The name was there, but empty. No matches, no mentor assigned, no notes from staff, just blank space. It wasn't negligence that stood out. It was absence, like no one ever thought to bother. He moved next to the cafeteria. It was between breakfast and first period, and the place was quiet, a few janitors wiping tables, staff prepping for lunch. The smell of disinfectant, mixed with yesterday's fries. Shaq nodded at Miss Renna, the kitchen supervisor, who recognized him instantly. Still coming round even when no one's watching, she said with a chuckle. What brings you down to the trenches? Shaq leaned against the counter and asked gently. You remember a student named Noah Delaney? Her face shifted, like she'd been reminded of a bruise she hadn't realized was still tender. I do, she said. Sweet boy. His mama used to work back here with us. Miss Carlene. Passed last spring. Hit us hard. Real quiet lady. Wore her pain like makeup, covered up but always there. Shaq nodded slowly. He been alright since? She hesitated. If by alright you mean breathing, I guess. But that boy's been carrying a weight since long before his mama passed. Hard to carry grief in silence. Harder when no one notices you're there to begin with. Shaq thanked her and stepped back out. The hallway now filling with students. He moved toward the counselor's office, stopping just short of the glass door. Inside, a woman in her early 30s, stylish blazer and clipboard in hand, was giving instructions to a senior about college applications. Her tone was upbeat, efficient, polished, like most of the faculty at Roosevelt. When Shaq entered, she greeted him with performative cheer. He asked about Noah. Just a check-in, he said. She blinked. Noah Delaney. Yes. I believe I've seen his name in our system. Special accommodations, I think. He's mostly independent. Doesn't seek services. Shaq studied her expression. Not unkind, but uninvolved. The kind of look people wore when they didn't see a face behind the file. No bullying reports? He asked. She frowned slightly, tapping her tablet. Not recently. There was a flag from a substitute last semester about a verbal incident, but Noah didn't pursue it. Didn't want to make trouble. Shaq leaned forward. You think not asking for help means he didn't need it? She looked taken aback. Well, we're limited in what we can do if students don't come forward. He gave a nod that ended the conversation, but not the tension. On his way out, he noticed a board listing, student leaders, with names like Braden Carr and Savannah Reese plastered in gold print, under photos of them smiling at community events. The irony was a punch to the gut. He spent the rest of the morning wandering campus, not aimlessly, but with intention. He talked to the janitor who worked the West Wing. Mr. Tompkins, a wiry man with deep laugh lines who'd seen more in silence than most saw in surveillance footage. You mean the quiet kid with the wheels? Tompkins asked, squinting. Yeah, I seen him. Keeps to himself. Smart. Real smart. Sometimes he hums little beats to himself when he thinks nobody's listening. Shaq raised a brow. Beats? Oh yeah, Tompkins said. Music. The boy got rhythm. Sits in the shade some days, earbuds in, tapping out something on that little tablet of his. Sounded like radio stuff. Real clean. I told the vice principal once, said maybe the school could feature him. Never happened. By the time Shaq left the building, the weight in his chest had doubled. This wasn't just neglect, it was systemic forgetting. A kind of erasure that happened when people decided a kid didn't matter enough to look closer. That evening he made a choice. He asked around and got Noah's address, just enough to pay a visit, not to confront, but to understand. He wasn't a teacher or counselor. He was something else. Something schools didn't have on payroll. The Delaney apartment complex was modest, tucked behind a gas station on the edge of town. Peeling paint, cracked sidewalks, quiet air. Shaq parked and walked up slowly, finding Noah's unit by the glow of a blue light, seeping through the blinds. He knocked gently. A pause, then the sound of the wheelchair humming forward. Noah opened the door. Surprise registering first, then confusion. Shaq didn't step in. He didn't offer a smile. You got a few minutes? He asked. Noah nodded, cautiously. Inside, the space was small but tidy. A single photo of his mother sat on a shelf above the microwave, framed in gold plastic. The living room doubled as a studio. Wires snaked across the carpet. A small soundboard blinked next to a cracked laptop, and a stack of headphones lay beside a speaker the size of a cereal box. Shaq looked around and then sat on the edge of the couch. You make all this? He asked, nodding toward the setup. Noah shrugged. It's just something I do. You ever let anyone hear it? Noah hesitated. Doesn't really matter. Nobody listens. Shaq leaned forward. That's not true. Noah turned slowly. Brows raised. Not anymore, Shaq said. They sat in silence for a while, the soft hum of the soundboard filling the air like a third person in the room. Then Noah picked up his tablet and played something. It started quiet, static, then a low hum, then voices, laughter. Familiar laughter. It was a loop of what had happened in the gym. Someone had recorded it. Or maybe someone didn't know their phone had been hijacked. Noah had cut it together with ambient beats. Underneath the mockery, He'd layered in pulsing bass and gentle piano. It didn't make the cruelty go away. It made it articulate, beautiful, haunting. Shaq listened, still as stone. "How long you been making stuff like this?" he asked softly. "Since before she died," Noah replied, nodding toward the photo of his mother. "She always said if I couldn't walk, I should fly." Shaq stood. "This ain't just bullying," he said, voice low and heavy with conviction. "This is rot, and I don't let rot sit in a place where kids are supposed to grow." Noah didn't smile, but his posture changed. Just slightly. Like something lifted. Shaq walked to the door and paused. "You ever think about what music does to silence?" he asked, hand on the knob. Noah shook his head. "It breaks it." And then he left. Outside, under the dim porch light, Shaq didn't reach for his keys. He reached for his plan. He wasn't invited formally. He didn't need to be. Miss Elridge had casually mentioned the meeting to him in the teacher's lounge earlier that week, assuming he wouldn't show. But he sat through the opening greetings, listened to the minutes being read aloud, endured the rote celebration of quarterly test score bumps and upcoming infrastructure improvements. But what held his attention wasn't the agenda. It was the tone, the undercurrent. One by one, names began to rise, familiar names. Braden Carr was praised for leading the student ambassadors in organizing the fall charity drive. Savannah Reese was lauded for her essay on community bridging, which had apparently placed in a statewide competition. Knox and Landon received nods for helping with the Junior Entrepreneurship Initiative. Their accomplishments read like trophies, echoed across the room with rehearsed admiration. Their parents sat in the back rows, all business casual and polite smirks. Braden's father, Councilman Dean Carr, nodded appreciatively with each mention of his son, shaking hands like he was campaigning, even in a school hallway. He had the practiced ease of someone used to people bending toward him. Shaq had seen his type before, not loud with power, just comfortably saturated in it. When the principal opened the floor for community commentary, Shaq leaned forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even change his posture. He simply said, "I'd like to raise a concern about student dynamics." The room paused. Not fully, but enough to notice. "There's a pattern I've been observing. Students being targeted, not with fists, but with silence, with laughs that come from privilege, with cameras, with whispers, and it's not random." Ms. Elridge's smile stiffened. "We always encourage students to speak up if something's wrong, and our faculty works hard to—" "I'm not talking about policy," Shaq said, still calm. "I'm talking about culture, the kind that celebrates leadership, from the same four names, while ignoring the kids carrying the most weight. You know it, and I know it." There was an uncomfortable shifting of papers. Someone coughed. Councilman Carr gave a tight smile, tapping something into his phone. Shaq watched him do it. "Bullying's real," Shaq continued. "But what's worse is when it's polished up to look like popularity, when it hides behind test scores and family names, when it dresses in gold and smiles for the camera." A woman 2 seats down, PTA President Lawson, cut in gently. "Mr. O'Neill, we understand your concern, but surely if students aren't coming forward—" "That's the thing," Shaq interrupted. "They don't come forward because they already know what table they're not welcome at." The tension grew thick, like humidity before a storm. Miss Elridge cleared her throat and redirected the meeting to budget allocations. The shift was smooth, surgical, a subtle way to end a conversation without ever openly silencing it. But the message was clear. "We don't talk about that here." Shaq leaned back in his chair. He wasn't surprised. This wasn't a room built for truth. It was a room built for decorum. What stung wasn't the dismissal. It was the precision of it. The way cruelty had been repackaged into leadership. How racism had been ironed flat into paperwork. How invisibility was made systemic without leaving fingerprints. He walked out before the meeting adjourned, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Outside, the parking lot buzzed with post-meeting chatter. Parents in suits and blazers made small talk about the Booster Club and upcoming galas. Shaq passed them without stopping, but he heard one phrase that stuck like a splinter. "They say he's a good influence, but you know, he gets too emotional sometimes. Too involved." The voice was soft, female, practiced. Shaq didn't turn. He didn't need to know who said it. It could have been any of them. Driving home, his mind played the meeting like a looped recording. Every praise for Braden and his friends landed like a punch. Not because they were being celebrated, but because he now knew exactly what they'd been doing behind the curtain. And everyone else in power seemed content not to look. He thought of Noah again, thought of how invisible pain always wore the same mask. Quiet, polite, unproblematic, and how people in rooms like that board meeting didn't recognize suffering unless it screamed. They didn't see rot unless it leaked onto their white carpet. The next morning, Shaq didn't go straight to the gym or the field. He went to the library, pulled files, looked at leadership rosters, club lists, scholarship recipients. The same pattern repeated. The same students rotated between roles, lauded for initiatives built on press coverage and not real change. Meanwhile, the ones in wheelchairs, the ones without family donors, the ones who walked the halls like ghosts, they weren't even listed. Shaq closed the binder and exhaled slow. He wasn't angry in the explosive sense. His anger was quiet, grounded, rooted in a kind of disappointment that doesn't burn but corrodes, the kind that doesn't fade. Later that day, he passed Braden in the hallway. The boy was laughing with Knox and Savannah, leaning against a trophy case, their voices low and confident. He caught Shaq's gaze and gave a small nod, not respectful, smug, a silent declaration, "You can't touch me," and maybe that was true, for now. But what Braden didn't understand, what none of them did, was that Shaq wasn't coming for them with rules or outrage. He was coming with mirrors. And once you show people what they really look like, they can never go back to pretending they're beautiful. Shaq didn't come to Roosevelt the next morning as a coach, or even as a mentor. He walked in with the mind of a tactician. Quiet, calculated, focused. The warmth that usually followed his entrance was still there. Kids waving, a few dapping him up in the hallway, but his mind was already 20 steps ahead, moving pieces on a board no one else could see. He'd stopped expecting the system to wake itself up. Now he was going to make it look in the mirror and fling. The idea had taken form late the night, after the board meeting. It came like a pulse, sharp, simple, impossible to ignore. They protected cruelty because they didn't feel its consequences, so he wouldn't punish them. He'd reflect them. No lectures, no guilt trips, just exposure, slow, intentional, and public. He met with Ms. Elridge and pitched it like a gift. A leadership expansion, he said. A mentorship initiative to boost student unity. Pair high-performing leaders with underrepresented or socially isolated students. Build empathy. Close gaps. Positive PR for the district. She bit instantly. The board had been looking for a fresh campaign after community pushback about inclusivity. The idea of a student-led connection model, Roosevelt pairs, sounded perfect on paper. Clean, harmless, marketable. The administration loved it, and none of them noticed the glint behind Shaq's calm eyes. Within a week, the flyers were up. The language was polished. Real leaders, real growth. One school, one team. A committee, hand-picked by Shaq, drafted the matches. The rich kids were all on board. Publicly, they celebrated the program. "It's so needed," Savannah told the school paper. "I'm glad we're creating bridges." Braden gave a rehearsed smile to the student council camera, talking about service-driven leadership. None of them saw the trap. Each of them was matched with someone they'd either ignored, dismissed, or mocked in the past. It wasn't revenge, it was symmetry. Landon was paired with a soft-spoken transfer student who'd been placed in remedial classes because of a speech delay. Savannah was linked with a girl who'd spent the last year cycling in and out of school due to housing insecurity. Knox was matched with a sophomore on the autism spectrum who loved aviation and never made eye contact. But the master stroke, the real ignition, was Braden being paired with Noah. Shaq watched the roster drop from across the hallway, saw Braden's confident expression freeze the second he read the name. He didn't explode. That wasn't his style, but his posture told the whole story. A slight pull of his jaw, his eyes darting toward his friends for reaction, the forced smile that cracked too quickly. The school buzzed with gossip. Some kids thought it was a punishment. Others called it weirdly genius. But officially, it was all clean. Shaq made sure of it. The first mentor sessions were set in motion. Every pair would meet twice a week for 3 weeks in a monitored space. The art room repurposed as a neutral zone. Light supervision. Enough structure to seem professional. Enough space for things to unravel naturally. Shaq never hovered. He observed. From doorways. Through angled reflections in trophy cases. A lion in tall grass. The first Noah Braden meeting was textbook awkward. Noah sat rigid, fingers tapping a rhythm on his wheelchair armrest. Braden leaned back, legs crossed, drumming on his knee like he wanted to be anywhere else. Their conversation barely moved past names, but Shaq wasn't looking for sparks. He was looking for friction, because friction builds heat, and heat reveals everything. By the second session, Braden was trying, not sincerely, more like performing curiosity. "So what do you, do?" he asked. Noah responded flatly. "I design sound." Braden blinked, confused. "Like beats?" Noah shrugged. "Like truth." It hung there. No echo. Just silence. The third session cracked something open. Noah brought his tablet, showed Braden his setup, not to impress, just to fill the air. He pulled up one of his mixes, a subtle ambient track built from distorted hallway chatter and echoing sneaker squeaks. Then, underneath it all, laughter, not random. Braden's laughter, captured, warped, weaved into the beat like a ghost. Braden froze. "That's not," he started, but Noah interrupted, calm as water. "It's exactly what it is." Shaq, standing outside, couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He saw the shift in Braden's shoulders, the flicker of something unfamiliar. Shame. Braden left that day without saying anything. Noah didn't watch him go. In the following sessions, things got stranger. Braden kept showing up, but the arrogance cracked. He didn't joke. He didn't pose. Sometimes he just sat and listened to the soundscapes Noah had built, layered tapestries of real Roosevelt sounds. Footsteps, doors slamming, breathing, sometimes laughter, sometimes crying. Shaq noticed other changes too. Savannah skipped a session. Knox whispered about how the program was dumb. Landon rolled his eyes in the cafeteria. But their reputations were on the line, so they stayed in it, pretending to learn while feeling their reflections press closer. Outside of sessions, rumors flew. Someone claimed Braden had asked Noah to show him how to build a beat. Another swore he'd seen Knox looking lost after his meeting, like he didn't know how to talk to someone who didn't pretend. But Shaq wasn't measuring rumors. He was measuring impact. And impact, he knew, never came clean. It came with discomfort. One afternoon, as Shaq walked past the art room after hours, he saw Braden still sitting there, alone, lights off, just listening to a track Noah had left on loop. Shaq paused. The music coming through the crack in the door wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was honest. Back in his truck that evening, Shaq wrote in his notes, "Mirrors don't scream. They whisper. And sometimes that's louder." He scrolled through the mentorship feedback logs. Most of the rich kids wrote boilerplate nonsense. "Great experience. Helped me grow. Appreciate the program." But a few wrote different things. One said, "I didn't know how many people we don't see." Another said, "I kept thinking about what I'd sound like if someone recorded me without smiling." The mirror had started to work. But Shaq wasn't finished. He wasn't building a lesson. He was building a reckoning. And now that the stage was set, the next part of the plan, the part that would shake Roosevelt to its roots, was ready. The permission slip said it was part of the extended mentorship series. Home immersion, they called it. A final exercise in empathy, a chance for mentor students to witness the everyday environment of their paired partners. It wasn't mandatory, but it was strongly encouraged, and Braden Carr, son of Councilman Carr, could not afford to be seen as uncooperative. Especially not now. Not when the mentorship program had unexpectedly become a quiet social measuring stick at Roosevelt High. So when he was assigned to visit Noah Delaney's apartment on the city's worn-out east side, Braden forced a smile, nodded to the counselor, and said it would be interesting. But nothing prepared him for what was waiting behind that thin apartment door. Braden arrived at 4:07 p.m., 10 minutes late, in a matte black Audi SUV that stuck out like a polished lie on the cracked street. The apartment complex was silent, not eerie, just tired. Chipped balconies, faded siding, a rusting swing set out back with no children in sight. He knocked lightly, shifting uncomfortably on the doormat that read "Hope Lives Here." For a long second, nothing happened. Then the door opened, just enough for a sliver of Noah's face to appear behind the chain latch. Without a word, Noah undid the lock and backed his wheelchair away to let Braden in. Braden stepped inside cautiously, shoulders stiff, like he was entering a space he didn't want to taint, but didn't quite know how to respect. The apartment was small but sharply organized. Not decorated, not cozy. Functional, clean surfaces, faded carpet. A photo of Noah's late mother above a modest shelf stacked with secondhand books and tangled charging cords. But what dominated the space, what commanded the air, was the corner studio setup, modest, but meticulous. A keyboard sat beneath a laptop, balanced on a stack of textbooks. Beside it, a mixing console blinked gently with life. Headphones hung from a coat hook like medals. A thick black curtain hung over the only window, blotting out the world beyond. On the wall above the desk, post-its clung like a nervous constellation. Phrases, numbers, snippets of code, dates. Braden cleared his throat. So, this where the magic happens? Noah didn't answer. He just rolled toward the desk, tapped a key, and motioned to the nearby chair, an old wooden one that didn't match anything else in the room. Braden sat, his legs awkwardly splayed, still trying to keep his usual confidence stitched to his face. Noah opened a file. The first sound was laughter, distant, echoed, unmistakably, Braden's. Then came the low buzz of Roosevelt's gym crowd. Then another laugh, layered and sharper. Savannah's, a whisper, another voice. Knox murmuring something indecipherable, followed by a hiss of feedback, and finally silence, a long, jagged silence that somehow roared louder than everything before it. The audio file wasn't just sound, it was designed. Each pause had weight, each clip was placed with intent, a sonic trail through mockery and neglect. Braden leaned forward. Wait, is that me? Noah clicked another file. This one opened with the creak of Roosevelt's back stairwell. Then the sound of Braden's voice, clear as glass, saying, "He doesn't even talk. Why should he be here?" A pause. "He just takes up space." A soft chuckle followed. It wasn't staged. It was real. Braden's spine stiffened. "Where'd you get this?" he asked, the performance gone from his voice now, replaced by something thinner. Not guilt, fear. Noah spoke then, for the first time since Braden entered. "You don't notice what you say when you think no one's listening." Braden swallowed. Hard. The chair creaked beneath him. He wasn't used to this kind of confrontation. It wasn't loud. It wasn't public. It was internal, surgical, and somehow that made it worse. Noah opened a third file. This one was different. It started with ambient noise. Traffic hum, keyboard taps, the low thud of a ball hitting pavement. Then gradually, the sound of a school hallway emerged. Muffled conversations, locker doors, whispers. Not words but rhythms, the kind of details no one ever noticed. And then layered just beneath the texture, a single sentence. "You're not like us." Spoken flatly. Braden's voice again. "I made this one after you laughed at me near the vending machines," Noah said softly. Braden turned, eyes wide. I didn't mean." "You did," Noah interrupted, "and that's what matters." The words weren't angry. Just true. Shaq stood outside the building that evening, having parked a block away, and walked the rest of the distance in the gray dusk. He didn't need to be inside. He'd already been given a copy of Noah's work, a carefully curated zip folder, emailed to him with the subject line, "Proof," and Shaq had waited until he was alone to open it. Back at his apartment, lights dimmed, he sat in silence, as the sounds played through his speakers, not just recordings of cruelty, but of the space around it, the silences, after, the voices that didn't speak up, the subtle, unspoken architecture of indifference. Shaq had been a lot of things in his life: champion, father, mentor, icon, but nothing had pierced him like the slow, rising sound of a child recording his own pain just to prove it was real. He paused one track halfway through and leaned back in his chair. His chest felt heavy, not from the content, but from the clarity. There was no arguing this, no framing it as miscommunication or misunderstanding. These were receipts, raw, unfiltered, and the boy who collected them hadn't asked for justice. He just wanted someone to hear. The next day, Braden didn't speak to anyone. Not Shaq, not Savannah, not even Knox. He walked the halls like someone who'd seen a ghost, and maybe he had, not of a person, but of himself, of the version Noah had reflected back to him, of who he truly was when the spotlight wasn't on. That afternoon, Shaq saw Noah alone in the sound room again. The school had offered the old photography closet as a temporary studio, something Shaq had advocated for after seeing the scale of Noah's work. It was small, but it was sacred now. A space where truth got built beat by beat. Shaq stood in the doorway. "You did something most people don't dare," he said. "You made your pain undeniable." Noah didn't look up from his board. "I didn't do it for revenge." "I know." Shaq said. That's why it works. They didn't say anything else. They didn't need to. There was a rhythm between them now. An unspoken understanding forged not in sympathy, but in recognition. Back in his notes app that night, Shaq wrote a single line. When the voiceless find a mic, the world either listens or chokes. He intended to make Roosevelt do both. It started with a ping. One late Monday morning, midway through second period, a Roosevelt student opened the anonymous blog, Roosevelt Rewired, an underground digital space typically reserved for poetry, satire, and occasional rants about cafeteria food, and saw a new post titled simply Unmuted. No tags, no author name. Just a single black screen audio player with a play button. The first person clicked out of curiosity. By lunch 200 had listened. By final bell, nearly every phone on campus had a copy of Noah's soundpiece. Ripped, looped, passed around in DMs, and private group chats. It wasn't music, it was a documentary, an invisible documentary, of Roosevelt's undercurrent, stitched from the very walls of the school itself. It opened with ambient noise, the scrape of wheelchair tires, a faint locker slam, a teacher's tired voice muffled by distance. Then came the voices. Student voices. Familiar ones. Brayden, Savannah, Knox. All captured mid-laugh, mid-sneer, mid-dismissal. Not edited. Not manipulated. Just revealed. What struck most listeners wasn't just the cruelty in the words. It was the calm in how they were presented. The way Noah had layered the laughter under the beat. The way silence had been weaponized like a drumline. The subtle reverb of Brayden's voice asking, "Why is he even here?" echoed like an accusation aimed at the entire school. By the time last period let out, students weren't talking about who made the track. They knew, even if Noah's name wasn't on it. They knew, and it wasn't just what they heard. It was that they remembered hearing it in real time. The audio wasn't abstract. It was real. It was them. By Tuesday morning, the hallways had changed. Not dramatically. Not at first. But differently. A subtle shift. Eye contact held longer. Conversations quieted. Backpacks shuffled past each other with a new kind of caution. For the first time, students were listening to the silence around them. And through it all, headphones appeared. Everywhere. Red ones. Wireless ones. Full head cans. Bright buds. Dozens of students wore them in solidarity. A quiet nod to Noah's signature accessory. The staff didn't understand it at first, but they knew better than to stop it. Shaq walked through the main corridor that morning, without speaking. He didn't need to. Every whisper carved a new crack in the school's golden reputation. And unlike most cracks, these ones didn't start at the bottom. They started at the top. The administration was silent, deliberating, hiding behind language like reviewing sensitive material and respecting privacy. But the students weren't waiting. In AP English, a senior raised her hand and asked why Roosevelt had never featured students like Noah in the yearbook. In economics class, a student asked why all the mentorship leads came from the same 4 families. In gym, a 9th grader refused to do laps and instead played the audio track through a Bluetooth speaker until a teacher took it. In every hallway, tension walked beside them. Then came the standoff. It happened in the middle of the West Wing corridor, right outside the media lab. Between 4th and 5th period, Brayden, walking fast, hoodie up, jaw clenched, rounded the corner only to stop dead in his tracks. There stood Noah, alone, headphones on, chair centered in the hallway, unmoved. Students parted around him but didn't walk away. A crowd formed, slow and deliberate, a ring of quiet anticipation building like a storm cloud. Brayden tried to keep walking, but Noah didn't move. They were face to face. Eye level now. Equal, whether Brayden liked it or not. And then, without warning, Shaq stepped in. He didn't say a word. He just walked forward and took his place behind Noah, arms folded, eyes calm, expression unreadable. Brayden looked at him, then looked at Noah, then at the dozens of students now watching, earbuds in, phones at the ready, no one blinking. He turned and walked the other way. That moment, the hallway, the silence, the sheer presence of Shaq standing behind the smallest, quietest student in the school, became a symbol, not on purpose, but because it struck something deeper. Students talked about it like a scene from a movie. Teachers whispered about it in the break room. No violence, no threats, just presence, just truth standing its ground. And the system? The system began to panic, Not because of what had been done, but because it had been seen. Board members met in emergency sessions. Councilman Carr called the school, personally. The principal sent a vague letter home about unauthorized media, creating disruption. But the students didn't flinch. Every attempt to control the narrative only made it grow. That Friday, a group of students printed flyers with a QR code that led to the original blog post and posted them across town, coffee shops, gas stations, libraries. They labeled it Unmuted, a Roosevelt documentary. The audio was now streaming outside the school's walls. Local reporters picked it up within a week. At the next school board meeting, protesters stood outside holding signs. Hear us now. Silence is complicity. Noah matters. Inside, the mood was stiff. Ms. Elridge avoided eye contact with Shaq. Councilman Carr, attending in person, pushed for a full removal of the mentorship experiment and proposed new policies around digital monitoring. But the crowd wasn't with him. Not anymore. Shaq didn't speak at that meeting. He didn't need to, because Noah already had. Back at school, everything didn't change overnight. Braden still walked the halls. Though quieter now, Knox and Savannah kept their distance. A few of their former friends had peeled away, some out of guilt, others because their reputations couldn't afford the association. But something deeper had shifted. In media class, Noah was asked to give a breakdown of how he'd built the track, an official request from the department. He agreed, not with pride, but with purpose. He didn't tell his story in words. He told it in waves and frequencies, in the hum of institutional failure and the spike of exposed cruelty. He didn't seek applause, just understanding. Shaq watched from the back row, arms crossed, chest heavy, and in that moment, it hit him. The system hadn't failed to hear Noah, it had chosen not to, until he made listening impossible. That night, Shaq opened his notes app one more time and typed, "Real justice doesn't come when people finally feel guilty. It comes when they can't pretend anymore." The gym was full, but the energy felt different. Students filled the bleachers, some talking softly, others quiet with expectation. Teachers lined the walls like spectators, some arms crossed, others with clipboards held tighter than usual. At the front, a simple wooden podium stood beneath the Roosevelt High crest, lit by overheads that buzzed faintly. This wasn't a pep rally. No banners, no drums, just rows of students and the weight of a school that had been holding its breath for days. Shaq stood off to the side, his frame steady, unmoving, eyes scanning the crowd. He'd been in louder rooms, on brighter stages, but none with this kind of pressure. Not to perform, not to persuade, just to say what needed to be said in a way no one could dodge. The administration had invited him to speak, not because they wanted a reckoning, but because they hoped he'd calm things down, spin it into inspiration, maybe drop a few lines about unity and moving forward. But Shaq wasn't here to clean the mess. He was here to hold up the mirror. The principal introduced him with a flat, rehearsed tone, using phrases like valued community partner and respected leader. Polite applause followed. A few claps echoed more out of routine than real support. Shaq took the mic, without ceremony. He didn't adjust it, he didn't clear his throat. He just stepped forward and started. "I want to tell you a story." The gym fell still. No names, no photos, just a story about a boy. He let the silence breathe before continuing. There was a boy who didn't walk like other kids. He rolled. He moved slower, and because of that, people noticed him differently. Not for what he said, not for what he created, but for how he moved. That boy came to school every day, knowing he was being watched, and not the good kind of watching, the kind where you feel small, where you feel like your every move is a joke you didn't agree to be part of. Some students shifted. The teachers stilled. Shaq's voice stayed level. No anger, no guilt, just clarity. That boy didn't fight back. He didn't cry out. He didn't tattle. He recorded. He listened. He captured everything. The laughter, the silence, the whispers when people thought they were safe. He turned it into something nobody could ignore. Shaq paused, his eyes sweeping across the rows. He didn't name names. He didn't put anyone on blast. He didn't seek revenge. He just told the truth. And the truth was enough to shake this place. You could feel it then, that tightening in the chest, the shift in posture, students glancing at one another. Teachers blinking slower. Some of the louder kids slouched lower. Some of the quieter ones sat up straighter. Shaq kept going. See, we got real good in this place at pretending. Pretending that leadership means wearing matching jackets. Pretending that school pride is louder than pain. Pretending that a kid who doesn't speak up must be doing okay. But pretending ain't protecting anybody. It's just covering rot with a fresh coat of paint. He took a slow breath. And when someone finally stops pretending, when they show you what the silence sounds like, that's when everything shakes. Not because it's loud, but because it's true. The gym was silent. A different kind of silence than before. Not expectant, not indifferent, sober. There's no list of who laughed. No spreadsheet of who looked away. But I'll say this, if you were in the room, and you laughed, then you were the room. He let it land. Didn't flinch. Didn't soften. A student in the front row wiped his eye. A teacher near the back shifted her clipboard to cover her face. A senior who used to lead morning announcements pulled her hoodie over her head. Shaq leaned into the mic again. We talk a lot about building leaders in this school. Let me tell you something real. Leadership ain't charm. It ain't money. It ain't what your daddy does for a living. Leadership is what you do when nobody's clapping. It's what you do when you hear something wrong and still speak. Another pause. There are people in this room who wear the right shoes, say the right things, win the right awards, but deep down they know they've stepped over others to stay on top. And there are people in this room who've been stepped on so long they forgot what standing feels like. He pointed gently at the crowd. No one specific, just an arc of motion. You can flip that. You can change what kind of room you are. But not by ignoring what's been heard. Not by pretending this week didn't happen. Change starts by listening harder than you speak. For the first time since he started, Shaq let his eyes rest on Noah, who sat midway up the bleachers, surrounded by silence that wasn't isolating anymore. Not today. A few students sat next to him now. One had their headphones on, another had a hand resting lightly on Noah's armrest. No pity, just presence. Shaq stepped back from the mic. That's all I came to say. No music played. No applause followed right away. Just stillness. Then, after several long seconds, a slow, quiet clap began. One pair of hands near the back, joined by another, and another, until the whole gym stood in a slow ripple of acknowledgement. Not celebration, not spectacle, just the kind of standing that says, we hear it now, we see it now, we know it happened. Shaq didn't wait for the ovation to rise. He turned and walked off the stage, his presence lingering, like thunder long after the sky has gone quiet. Outside the gym, the sky had begun to shift. Not stormy, but different. A little cooler. A little clearer. No one would forget that assembly, not because it was grand, but because it didn't try to be. It just told the truth. And that, finally, was enough. The morning after the assembly, Roosevelt High didn't wake up to silence. It woke up to scrutiny. Parents flooded inboxes. District officials called emergency meetings. News vans parked 2 blocks from campus, trying to catch students between classes. Headlines read, Student audio exposes cruelty at elite suburban school, soundtrack of a scandal, and the high school that got heard. What had begun as a private act of expression had rippled outward into public reckoning. Donors began pulling money. Not all of them, just the ones who needed everything polished. The ones who preferred their legacy halls built on smooth silence rather than hard truths. Events were paused, renovation projects delayed. The pressure spread upward fast. Braden's father, Councilman Carr, called it a smear campaign, citing the mentorship program as a flawed experiment and warning the district against emotional manipulation in educational policy. On camera he wore concern. Off camera he wore panic. But the students weren't buying it. A petition started in second period civics, crafted by a quiet junior who hadn't said much all year. It called for Roosevelt to restructure its leadership programming, enforce transparency in student disciplinary procedures, and formally include student voices in board-level decisions. By lunch it had over 1,200 signatures. By the end of the week it had gone district-wide. In the art room, Miss Cordell's advanced media students had been quietly working on something else. One of them, a sophomore named Delilah, usually invisible, always scribbling, asked Noah if she could build something around his audio. Not for credit, for clarity. Noah didn't say yes right away. He just looked at her, reading something in her silence, and then handed her a file called Pulse. What she created was more than a project. It was a visual sound installation. LED lights flickering to each audio cue, a rotating sculpture of headphones in the center, and student-recorded testimonials layered in low, beneath the primary mix. It wasn't accusatory. It was reflective, immersive. The piece was submitted to the Regional Youth Arts Showcase. It won first place. Noah didn't attend the award ceremony. He said he didn't need to. He'd already said everything he wanted to say. But his name was announced over loudspeakers in a room that had never known he existed. And this time, no one mispronounced it. That mattered. Back at Roosevelt, change didn't sweep in like a tidal wave. It arrived in shifts, quiet shifts. The mentorship program wasn't shut down, but it was restructured. Instead of curated top-down pairings, students were allowed to form their own connections. Leadership titles became application-based, not inherited by default. A new position was created, student accountability liaison. Noah was offered the role. He declined. Instead, he recommended someone else. A freshman with a stutter and a notebook full of ideas. Shaq watched it all from the sidelines. He didn't take the credit. He didn't need to. That was never the goal. He'd never tried to fight the system by punching it in the mouth. He just peeled back the wallpaper and let everyone see what was underneath. He didn't expose people. He exposed patterns, and patterns are harder to ignore once the lighting changes. He walked to campus like usual. Hoodie up, headphones on, nodding to students who used to look through him. Now they looked at him, not out of fear, out of recognition. He passed Braden one day, near the water fountains. The boy didn't sneer. He didn't puff up. He looked down, eyes tired, steps slower than before. The polish had dulled. But something else was there too. Not guilt, maybe not yet, but reflection, and that was a start. In the teacher's lounge, Shaq overheard a conversation between two history instructors. One of them was saying how maybe, just maybe, they'd been promoting the wrong kind of leadership. The other didn't reply, but didn't argue either. Even the principal, Ms. Elridge, changed her posture. She didn't apologize publicly, but she scheduled listening circles. She revised teacher development protocols. She even asked Noah, gently, if he'd consider presenting on the role of digital storytelling in modern advocacy. He said he'd think about it. One afternoon, as spring pushed into bloom and the air softened, Shaq sat alone in the empty gym, just listening. No bouncing balls, no announcements, just echoes. The same gym that once held that moment of truth. Noah in his chair, Shaq behind him, the silence cracking open like glass. He closed his eyes and replayed the beats in his head. No violence, no shouting, just truth. And that truth had left marks, not scars, imprint. Outside the gym, in the hallway trophy case, someone had placed a pair of headphones on display. No plaque, no explanation, just the headphones, resting between a football signed by last year's MVP and a photo of the championship chess team. It didn't need context. Everyone knew. Roosevelt wasn't fixed. It still had polished corners and shadowed ones. Some parents still made calls. Some teachers still avoided hard conversations. Privilege hadn't vanished, but for the first time, it had blinked. And that blink, that moment of awareness, it was the first real crack. Noah wasn't walking the halls like a hero. He still rolled alone sometimes, still kept his headphones on. But now when people passed him, they didn't look away. They nodded. They said his name. And for a boy who'd once felt like a whisper, being seen was enough.
Not everyone could feel it, but Shaq could.
He walked the edge of the football field, hands in his pockets, watching the new wave of students spill onto the grass after 8th period. They were younger now, or maybe he was just finally seeing how much time had moved. It had been a year. Noah had graduated quietly. No speech, no spotlight. Just a nod, a tassel, and a private ceremony with Miss Cordell and a few classmates, who understood the magnitude of what he'd done. His name wasn't etched into the banners or sewn onto the yearbook's back pages, but everyone knew. His mixtape was still used in media studies. The headphones in the trophy case hadn't been moved, not one. Shaq paused by the home bench, leaning his weight into the fence rail, squinting against the soft afternoon sun. A cluster of students had formed near the far gate, joking around, tossing a half-deflated football. They looked like every other class before them, careless in that beautiful way that only teenagers can afford. But in the far corner, near the portable classroom ramp, something else caught his eye. A girl, small frame, bright lavender hoodie struggled with her backpack, the weight of her books tipping awkwardly against the handles of her walker. No fanfare, no teacher watching, Just a quiet moment most people would scroll past. And then, instinctively, one of the boys broke away from the group. He jogged over, not laughing, not showing off, just helping. He picked up her bag, slung it over his shoulder, walked with her up the ramp like it was nothing. No camera, no hashtags, just decency. Shaq didn't smile, but something in his chest loosened. That was the roar. The one nobody heard. Back inside the building, the main hallway smelled like fresh wax and distant cafeteria bread. Shaq walked past the student council display case, past the framed photos of leadership summits and archived newspaper clippings. Everything in glass. Everything preserved. But he wasn't heading for the path. He was heading for the center. The trophy case. It sat beneath the skylight now. New architectural addition from a recent remodel funded by, ironically, community donations that surged after the scandal. The school had made changes, not just symbolic ones. A student-led ethics committee now had permanent voting rights in policy meetings. Peer advocacy clubs had real funding. Roosevelt hadn't become perfect, but it had stopped pretending it already was. Shaq reached the case and stood still. There they were, Noah's headphones, resting on a custom pedestal of reclaimed wood, surrounded by nothing but empty space. There was no plaque, no mention of what they were or whose they'd been. Just the object itself, worn, frayed, padded ear cups, slightly bent from use, a relic of something most people never dared turn into history. But here they were, not because someone gave permission, but because someone refused to stay quiet. Shaq opened his phone and scrolled through his notes, the same file he'd been keeping since his first day on campus. Dozens of entries, short, raw, unfiltered, things he never said out loud. He added a new one. You don't fix the world with fists. You fix it with mirrors. You show people what they are. And you let the good ones feel ashamed enough to change. He hit save, slid the phone back in his pocket, and turned. As he walked down the main corridor, a few students nodded at him, subtle but intentional. One girl whispered something to her friend, and both looked at him with wide, serious eyes, not in awe, but in acknowledgement. They knew, maybe not the full story, but enough to know he wasn't just Coach Shaq. He was part of why the air felt different now. He stopped by the media lab before leaving, checking in with Ms. Cordell. The classroom had expanded, new tech, better lighting. On the wall hung framed prints from last year's showcase. One of them showed a blurred image of Roosevelt's hallway with ghostly silhouettes. Below it, a quote, "We weren't invisible, just unheard." Noah's voice. Cordell greeted Shaq with a knowing glance. "He emailed last week," she said, gesturing toward the wall. "Said he's working on a new series. Wants to mix protest sound with street ambient." Shaq nodded, the pride in his chest rising slow and steady. "Of course he is," he said. As he stepped outside into the open again, a breeze rolled across the grass, lifting the edge of his hoodie. He stood for a moment near the flagpole, watching students drift toward buses, sneakers scuffing pavement, backpacks bouncing. The day looked normal, unremarkable, and yet he knew somewhere someone in that crowd would hold the door a little longer, speak a little sooner, stay a little quieter to listen. 'Cause they'd heard the sound once, and once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. It doesn't take a riot to change a school. Sometimes it only takes one voice that refused to be erased, one sound that carried longer than expected, one roar that didn't need volume, just truth. And that, Shaq knew, was the kind of legacy that never needed a spotlight. Because legacy doesn't shout, it echoes. If this story made you pause, don't scroll past the next Noah you see. If you've ever stayed silent in a loud room, ask yourself why. Real change starts in whispers, and you're already listening. Now go echo it, where it counts.